Picture this. A group of 7 individuals walks into a corporate boardroom. The executives sitting around the mahogany table barely glance up from their phones. Within 30 seconds, every single person in that room has stopped breathing. Not from shock, not from fear, but from pure, overwhelming awe. The presentation hasn't even started yet. What you're about to witness isn't just another success story. It's not about overnight riches or lucky breaks. This is the raw, unfiltered journey of 7 people who defied every statistic, broke every rule, and rewrote the definition of what's possible when the human spirit refuses to surrender. They were called unemployable. Society had written them off. Even their own families had given up hope. But sometimes the most extraordinary transformations happen in the darkest moments, when people have absolutely nothing left to lose. You think you know what determination looks like? You think you've seen teamwork in action? Think again, because what this team accomplished in 18 months will challenge everything you believe about human potential, second chances, and the power of refusing to accept no as a final answer. Get ready to question everything you thought you knew about success, failure, and the incredible things that happen when broken people decide to rebuild themselves together. Marcus Williams stared at the rejection letter in his hands, the 4th one this week. The words blurred together as his eyes filled with frustration. "We regret to inform you that your application was not successful." The same phrase, different letterhead. He crumpled the paper and tossed it into the overflowing trash can beside his kitchen table. At 42, Marcus had been out of work for 8 months. The factory where he had worked for 15 years had closed down, leaving him and hundreds of others scrambling for jobs that seemed to disappear faster than they could apply for them. His savings were gone, his confidence shattered, and his family's faith in him hanging by a thread. 3 miles across town, Sarah Chun was having her own moment of despair. She sat in her car outside the unemployment office, fighting back tears. The counselor inside had just informed her that her benefits were running out. At 35, with 2 young children and a mountain of medical bills from her daughter's recent surgery, Sarah felt like she was drowning in an ocean of impossibility. Sarah had been a brilliant software engineer before the tech company she worked for was acquired and her entire department eliminated. For 6 months, she had sent out resumes, attended interviews, and received the same response. Overqualified, too expensive, or simply no response at all. The industry she loved seemed to have moved on without her. Meanwhile, in a small apartment on the other side of the city, David Rodriguez was staring at his laptop screen, watching another potential client walk away from a video call without explanation. At 28, David had been trying to build his graphic design business for 2 years, but every time he seemed to gain momentum, something would go wrong. Clients would disappear without paying, projects would fall through, and his portfolio, despite being genuinely impressive, wasn't opening the doors he desperately needed. David's situation was complicated by his struggle with social anxiety. Face-to-face meetings were torture for him, and networking events felt like walking through fire. He was incredibly talented, but in a world that seemed to value personality over ability, he felt invisible and increasingly hopeless. That same evening, Lisa Thompson was cleaning offices downtown for the 3rd job she worked each day. At 51, she had never imagined her life would look like this. After her divorce 3 years ago, she had been forced to take any work she could find just to keep her head above water. She had a degree in education, but had been out of the classroom for so long that schools wouldn't consider her for teaching positions. Lisa's back ached from bending over desks and vacuuming floors, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional exhaustion of feeling like her life had no purpose beyond survival. She had once been passionate about helping young people learn and grow. Now, she spent her days in empty buildings, invisible to the world around her. Across town, James Parker was sitting in his truck outside a construction site, having just been told there was no work for him today. At 39, James was a skilled carpenter who had built a reputation for quality craftsmanship. But a back injury 6 months ago had slowed him down, and contractors were increasingly choosing younger, faster workers over experience and skill. James had been supporting his elderly mother and his teenage son on his own since his wife passed away 2 years ago. The pressure of being the sole provider while dealing with chronic pain and diminishing opportunities was crushing him. He had always been a man who solved problems with his hands, but he couldn't build his way out of this situation. In a different part of the city, 24-year-old Alex Kumar was lying on his childhood bed, staring at the ceiling of his parents' house. He had graduated from college 18 months ago with a degree in marketing, but the entry-level positions he found either required years of experience he didn't have or paid so little he couldn't afford to move out of his parents' home. Alex felt trapped between being overqualified for minimum wage jobs and underqualified for the career positions he had studied for. His parents, who had sacrificed so much for his education, were losing patience with the situation. The weight of their disappointment and his own sense of failure was becoming unbearable. The seventh member of what would become this extraordinary team was 61-year-old Robert Chun, no relation to Sarah despite the shared surname. Robert had been a middle manager at a mid-sized company for 20 years until corporate restructuring eliminated his position. At his age, finding new employment felt nearly impossible. Younger candidates were cheaper, more technologically adaptable, and seen as better long-term investments. Robert's retirement savings had been depleted during a medical emergency with his wife the previous year. Now, at an age when he should have been planning for retirement, he was desperately searching for any opportunity to rebuild his financial security. The interviews he managed to get were exercises in humiliation, with people young enough to be his children politely explaining why he wasn't the right fit. None of these 7 individuals knew each other existed. They were scattered across the city, each fighting their own private battles against rejection, financial pressure, and the slow erosion of hope. They represented millions of people who had been left behind by economic changes, technological shifts, and social transformations they had no control over. The irony was that each of them possessed valuable skills and experiences. Marcus had an unmatched work ethic and practical problem-solving abilities honed by years on the factory floor. Sarah's technical expertise was still current and valuable, even if the market didn't seem to recognize it. David's creative talents were extraordinary, limited only by his struggles with self-promotion. Lisa's educational background and life experience gave her insights into human development and communication that were incredibly valuable. James combined traditional craftsmanship with an innovative approach to problem-solving. Alex brought fresh perspectives and digital native skills that older generations couldn't match. Robert offered decades of management experience and institutional knowledge that younger workers simply couldn't possess. But the job market seemed designed to focus on what each of them lacked rather than what they could contribute. Marcus was seen as outdated, Sarah as too expensive, David as unmarketable, Lisa as irrelevant, James as unreliable, Alex as inexperienced, and Robert as obsolete. The system that was supposed to connect talented people with opportunities was failing all of them. What none of them realized was that their individual struggles were about to intersect in a way that would change everything. Sometimes the most powerful solutions emerge not from individual brilliance, but from the collision of different perspectives, experiences, and desperations. The catalyst for this collision was an unassuming community center in the heart of the city. The building was old, underfunded, and largely ignored by the community it was meant to serve. But it had one thing that would prove invaluable: a weekly support group for unemployed professionals run by a volunteer counselor named Patricia Williams. Patricia had seen hundreds of people pass through her group over the years. Most attended for a few weeks, found work, and moved on with their lives. Others became regular attendees who seemed more interested in commiserating than finding solutions. But occasionally, she encountered individuals who possessed something special, something that couldn't be measured by traditional metrics. Marcus had been attending Patricia's group for 3 weeks, drawn not by the support, but by the free coffee and the opportunity to get out of his empty apartment. He sat in the back, listened politely, and left without engaging much with the other attendees. He had been disappointed by people too many times to invest emotional energy in strangers who were dealing with their own problems. Sarah had started attending the previous week after finding Patricia's group listed on a website for unemployed tech workers. She was skeptical about the value of sitting in a circle talking about problems that had no easy solutions, but her isolation was becoming dangerous, and she needed some form of human connection that didn't involve her children asking when mommy was going to find a job. David had never attended a support group in his life. His social anxiety made the idea terrifying, but desperation had finally overcome fear. He had spent the previous 3 days building up the courage to walk through the community center doors, and he planned to sit quietly and leave as quickly as possible. Lisa had been coming to Patricia's group for 6 weeks, longer than anyone else currently attending. She found comfort in the routine and the reminder that she wasn't the only person struggling to rebuild her life. Lisa had become an unofficial greeter, welcoming newcomers and offering encouragement to those who seemed on the verge of giving up. James had heard about the group from a former coworker, but had resisted attending because he didn't think talking about problems would solve anything. However, his son had suggested it might help, and James was running out of strategies for managing his stress and frustration. Alex had discovered the group through an online forum for recent graduates struggling to find career track employment. He was hoping to network with people who might have connections or insights that could help him break into the job market. Robert had been referred to the group by his doctor, who was concerned about the depression and isolation that seemed to be consuming him. Robert was skeptical about the value of group therapy, but was willing to try anything that might help him regain his sense of purpose and direction. The meeting that would change everything was scheduled for a rainy Thursday evening in November. Patricia had been running her group for 8 years, and she had developed an intuition about when something significant was about to happen. She couldn't explain it rationally, but the energy in the room felt different that evening. As the 7 individuals filed into the meeting room, each carrying their own burden of disappointment and uncertainty, none of them could have imagined that they were about to become part of something that would not only transform their own lives, but inspire thousands of others around the world. The chairs were arranged in their usual circle, the coffee was brewing in the corner, and Patricia was reviewing her notes for the evening's discussion. She had planned to focus on networking strategies and the importance of maintaining professional relationships during periods of unemployment. But sometimes the most important conversations are the ones that happen when you abandon the agenda and let genuine human connection take over. Marcus arrived first, as he always did. He liked to choose his seat and observe the room before others arrived. Sarah came next, checking her phone for messages about her daughter's school pickup schedule. David slipped in quietly and took a seat near the door, ready to escape if his anxiety became overwhelming. Lisa arrived with her usual warm smile and immediately began setting out additional chairs, anticipating that new people might attend. James walked in looking tired and skeptical, but committed to giving this approach at least one honest try. Alex bounced in with nervous energy, looking around the room like he was studying for a test. Robert entered last, moving slowly but with the dignified bearing of someone who had held positions of responsibility. As they settled into their seats, none of them realized they were about to become part of a story that would be told in boardrooms, classrooms, and community centers around the world. They thought they were just 7 strangers trying to figure out how to restart their careers. They had no idea they were about to become a team that would redefine what was possible when people refused to accept defeat. The meeting began like every other session Patricia had facilitated over the years. Each person introduced themselves, shared their current situation, and listened politely as others did the same. But something unexpected happened when David, the quiet graphic designer, mentioned that he had been working on a project proposal for weeks, but couldn't figure out how to make it financially viable. Sarah, who had been staring at her hands while he spoke, suddenly looked up. "What kind of project?" she asked, her voice tentative but interested. David's face flushed, but he continued. It's a platform that would help local businesses create professional marketing materials without hiring expensive agencies. I have the design skills, and I understand what small businesses need, but I can't figure out the technical side of building a web platform. I could build that, Sarah said quietly. I mean, I've built similar systems before. The technology isn't complicated if you know what you're doing. Patricia watched this exchange with growing interest. In 8 years of running support groups, she had seen people offer advice and encouragement to each other countless times. But she had never seen the kind of immediate, practical connection that was happening between David and Sarah. Marcus, who had been listening silently, leaned forward. My brother-in-law owns 3 small restaurants, he said. He's always complaining about how much he spends on flyers and advertisements that don't work. If you two could build something that actually helped his business, he might pay for it. The room fell silent. For months, each of these individuals had been thinking about their problems in isolation, focusing on what they couldn't do, what they didn't have, what was working against them. Suddenly, they were talking about possibilities, about solutions, about things they could create together. Lisa, who had been observing this interaction with fascination, spoke up. I used to teach business communication, she said. If you're thinking about approaching small business owners, I could help you figure out how to explain what you're offering in a way that makes sense to them. Most people in tech industries are terrible at talking to normal business owners. Alex, who had been bouncing his leg nervously throughout the meeting, suddenly stopped moving. I could help with the marketing strategy, he said, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. I mean, I know I don't have experience, but I've been studying digital marketing for 2 years, and I understand how small businesses think because I grew up in one. My family owns a dry cleaning business. James looked around the group, processing what he was hearing. You're talking about starting a business, he said, not as a question, but as a statement that needed to be acknowledged. Robert nodded slowly. They are. And if they're serious about it, they're going to need someone who understands how businesses actually operate. I've managed budgets, supervised employees, dealt with vendors, handled customer complaints, and navigated corporate politics for 20 years. Not all of that experience becomes irrelevant just because one company decided they didn't need me anymore. Patricia realized that her planned discussion about networking strategies had been completely abandoned, but she had never been more interested in where a conversation was heading. These 7 people were talking about creating something together, but they were also talking about creating it in a way that addressed exactly the kinds of problems that had led each of them to her support group in the first place. Wait, Sarah said, her engineer's mind starting to organize the possibilities. Are we actually talking about doing this? Because if we are, we need to be realistic about what it would involve. David took a deep breath. I've been thinking about this project for 6 months, he said. I've researched the market, I've sketched out the user interface, I've even started building some prototype designs. The only thing stopping me has been that I can't do it alone. None of us can do anything alone, Marcus said bluntly. That's why we're all here. But maybe together we could do something that actually matters. Over the next 2 hours, the 7 individuals transformed from a support group into a planning committee. They discussed David's original concept, but they also expanded it, shaped it, and improve it based on their combined experiences and perspectives. Sarah explained that the technical platform David envisioned was absolutely feasible, but it would be more powerful if they designed it to be modular and scalable. Instead of just helping businesses create marketing materials, they could build a comprehensive system that addressed multiple small business needs. Lisa suggested that they focus initially on businesses that were struggling with the same kinds of challenges they had all faced, companies that had valuable skills and services but didn't know how to communicate their value effectively to potential customers. Alex proposed that they position their service not just as a cost-saving tool, but as a way for small businesses to compete more effectively with larger companies that had professional marketing departments. James offered a practical perspective on implementation, suggesting that they start by proving their concept with a small group of local businesses before trying to scale up. Robert outlined the business structure they would need, including legal considerations, financial planning, and operational logistics. Marcus volunteered to be their first test case, offering to help them refine their approach by working with his brother-in-law's restaurants. By the end of the evening, they had the foundation of a business plan, a clear division of responsibilities, and a timeline for their first phase of development. But more importantly, they had something none of them had possessed individually: hope backed by concrete action steps. Patricia watched them exchange contact information and schedule their first official team meeting for the following Saturday. She had seen many support group discussions that generated enthusiasm and good intentions, but she had rarely seen anything that resulted in specific, actionable commitments. As the group prepared to leave, Robert asked a question that had been nagging at him throughout the discussion. Why do we think this is going to work when all of us have been struggling individually for months? The room fell quiet as everyone considered this question. Finally, Lisa answered, "Because we're not trying to fit into something that already exists," she said. "We're creating something new that uses what we actually have instead of focusing on what we lack." Sarah nodded. "And because we're not competing with each other, we're combining our strengths instead of having our weaknesses compared to other people's strengths." David, who was still processing the idea that he had initiated something this significant, added, "Plus, we understand what it feels like to be dismissed or underestimated. We're not going to do that to the businesses we work with." Over the following week, each member of the newly formed team threw themselves into preparation for their Saturday meeting with an energy and focus they hadn't experienced in months. Marcus reached out to his brother-in-law and arranged for the team to meet with him the following week. Sarah began researching the technical requirements for the platform they envisioned. David refined his design concepts and started creating a presentation that would explain their vision clearly. Lisa drafted communication templates that would help them approach potential clients professionally. Alex researched their competition and identified gaps in the market they could fill. James created a project timeline that would keep them focused and accountable. Robert developed financial projections and identified the resources they would need to get started. When they met that Saturday morning in a corner booth at a local diner, each person arrived with materials, ideas, and a sense of purpose that had been missing from their lives for too long. The transformation in their energy and confidence was remarkable, even to themselves. Sarah had prepared a technical overview that broke down complex web development concepts into language that non-technical team members could understand. She had also researched cost-effective ways to build and host their platform, identifying open-source tools and resources that would minimize their startup expenses. David presented a series of mock-ups and user interface designs that brought their concept to life visually. His anxiety about presenting his work had been replaced by excitement about sharing ideas with people who understood their value. Lisa had created sample marketing materials and communication strategies that demonstrated how they could present their services to potential clients. She had also researched the local small business community and identified specific types of companies that would be ideal early adopters. Alex had prepared a comprehensive competitive analysis that showed them exactly how to position themselves in the market. He had also created social media strategy templates and identified cost-effective ways to reach their target audience. James had developed a project management system that would help them stay organized and accountable as they moved from planning to implementation. He had also researched the legal and regulatory requirements for starting their business. Robert had created financial projections, identified potential funding sources, and outlined the business structure that would give them the best chance of success. He had also prepared templates for client contracts and service agreements. Marcus brought something equally valuable: enthusiasm and practical feedback from his brother-in-law, who was not only willing to be their first client, but had referred them to 2 other local business owners who were interested in learning more about their services. As they spread their materials across the diner table, they realized they had created something remarkable in just 1 week. Each person had contributed their strongest skills while relying on others to fill in their gaps. The result was a comprehensive business plan that was more sophisticated and realistic than any of them could have developed individually. But the most significant change wasn't in their materials or their plan. It was in their attitude. For the first time in months, each of them was thinking like a business owner rather than a job seeker. They were focused on what they could create rather than what they had lost. They were planning for success rather than preparing for rejection. The shift in their thinking was so dramatic that other diner patrons began to notice their energy and excitement. A businessman at a nearby table asked what they were working on, and when David explained their concept, the man asked for their business card. They didn't have business cards yet, but Robert quickly wrote their contact information on a napkin and promised to follow up with more information. As the businessman walked away, the 7 team members looked at each other and started laughing. They had just made their first sales contact, and they hadn't even officially launched their business yet. That moment crystallized something important for all of them. They weren't just creating a business. They were creating a new identity for themselves. Instead of being unemployed, underemployed, or struggling entrepreneurs, they were becoming a team of innovators who were solving real problems for real businesses. The energy they generated that morning carried them through the next several weeks as they refined their concept, built their platform, and prepared for their first client presentation. Each team member took ownership of their responsibilities while staying connected to the group's overall mission. Sarah worked late into the night building their web platform, but she was energized by the knowledge that her technical skills were being used to create something meaningful rather than just to complete assignments for employers who didn't value her contributions. David poured his creative energy into designing materials that would help small businesses communicate more effectively with their customers. For the first time in months, he was creating work that felt personally meaningful rather than just professionally necessary. Lisa used her teaching skills to develop training materials that would help their clients understand and use their services effectively. She was back in her element as an educator, but now she was teaching adults who genuinely wanted to learn. Alex threw himself into market research and social media strategy, finally applying the theoretical knowledge he had gained in college to real-world challenges that had immediate practical applications. James managed their project timeline and logistics with the precision and attention to detail that had made him a sought-after craftsman. He was building something again, even if it was a business rather than a physical structure. Robert provided strategic guidance and business oversight, using his management experience to help the team avoid common startup pitfalls. He felt valuable and needed in a way he hadn't experienced since losing his corporate position. Marcus served as their connection to the local business community and their reality check when their plans became too abstract or complicated. His practical perspective kept them focused on solutions that would actually work for real business owners. 3 weeks after their first official team meeting, they were ready for their first client presentation. Marcus's brother-in-law had agreed to let them present their services to him and 2 other restaurant owners on a Tuesday afternoon at one of his locations. None of them had ever been more nervous or more excited about a professional opportunity. The restaurant was small, family-owned, and showed signs of a struggle that many local businesses faced. The walls needed painting, some of the chairs were mismatched, and the marketing materials scattered around the counter looked like they had been designed by someone who meant well, but lacked professional skills. It was exactly the kind of business their team had envisioned helping. Marcus's brother-in-law, Tony, introduced them to the other 2 restaurant owners, Maria, who ran a Mexican food truck that was trying to expand into catering, and Kevin, who owned a sandwich shop that had been struggling to compete with chain restaurants. All 3 business owners looked tired, stressed, and skeptical about what 7 unemployed people could possibly offer them. Robert began the presentation with a brief overview of their team's combined experience and expertise. He spoke with the confidence and authority that came from decades of professional presentations, but he also acknowledged their current situation honestly. "We're not here because we're successful," he said. "We're here because we understand what it's like when the traditional approaches aren't working." Lisa followed with an explanation of the communication challenges that small businesses typically faced. She had researched each of their potential clients' current marketing efforts, and she was able to point out specific problems and missed opportunities in a way that was helpful rather than critical. You're all trying to compete with businesses that have professional marketing departments, she explained. But you're doing it without professional marketing tools or strategies. David presented the visual concepts he had developed specifically for their businesses. Instead of showing generic templates, he had created sample marketing materials for each restaurant that demonstrated how professional design could help them communicate their unique value propositions more effectively. The difference between what they were currently using and what David had created was so dramatic that Maria asked if she could keep the samples. Sarah explained the technical platform in language that made sense to business owners who weren't interested in the details of web development. She focused on what the system would do for them rather than how it worked, demonstrating features that would save them time, money, and frustration. She had also prepared cost comparisons that showed how their service would be more affordable and more effective than the marketing approaches the restaurants were currently using. Alex presented market research that helped the business owners understand their competitive landscape and identify opportunities they hadn't recognized. He had analyzed their competitors' marketing strategies and identified specific ways each restaurant could differentiate itself more effectively. His presentation was so thorough and insightful that Kevin asked if he could hire Alex to do similar analysis for his other business ventures. James explained their implementation timeline and demonstrated the project management systems they would use to ensure reliable, professional service delivery. He had created maintenance schedules, quality control checklists, and communication protocols that addressed the kinds of problems small business owners had experienced with other service providers. Marcus concluded the presentation by explaining their pricing structure and service guarantees. They had decided to offer their first clients a success-based fee structure that aligned their compensation with their clients' results. If the marketing improvements didn't generate measurable increases in customer traffic or sales, the restaurants wouldn't pay the full fee. When they finished their presentation, the three restaurant owners sat in silence for several moments. Tony finally spoke. "I've been running this restaurant for 12 years, he said. I've worked with marketing companies, web designers, and advertising agencies. Most of them took my money and gave me materials that looked professional but didn't help my business. You've been here for an hour, and you already understand my business better than companies I paid thousands of dollars to." Maria nodded enthusiastically. "I've been trying to design my own marketing materials because I can't afford to hire professionals. What you show me today would probably double my catering bookings. When can we get started?" Kevin was more cautious, but equally interested. "I need to see some results before I commit to a long-term relationship," he said. "But if you could deliver what you're promising, I'll not only hire you, I'll refer you to every business owner I know." By the end of that afternoon, they had signed contracts with all three restaurants and had referrals to 4 additional businesses. But more importantly, they had proven to themselves that their concept worked and that their combined skills could create value that none of them could generate individually. The success of their first presentation created a momentum that carried them through the next several months. They officially registered their business, established bank accounts and accounting systems, and created professional materials that reflected their growing confidence and competence. Sarah completed development of their web platform ahead of schedule and under budget. The system was more sophisticated and user-friendly than their clients had expected, and it included features that addressed problems the restaurants hadn't even realized they could solve. Within 2 weeks of launching their first marketing campaigns, all 3 restaurant clients were reporting increased customer traffic and higher sales. David's design work began attracting attention beyond their immediate client base. Other businesses started contacting them after seeing the professional materials he had created for the restaurants. His portfolio, which had been gathering digital dust for months, was suddenly generating multiple inquiries each week. Lisa's communication strategies proved to be incredibly effective at helping small businesses connect with their target customers. She had developed messaging frameworks that helped business owners explain their value propositions clearly and persuasively. Several clients asked if she could provide communication training for their employees as well. Alex's marketing research and social media strategies generated measurable results that surprised even the team. His understanding of digital marketing trends and local market dynamics helped their clients reach new customers more effectively than they had ever been able to do on their own. James's project management and quality control systems ensured that every client received consistent, reliable service. His attention to detail and commitment to professional standards helped establish their reputation for dependability in a market where many service providers were unreliable. Robert's business management and strategic planning kept the team focused on sustainable growth rather than just immediate opportunities. His experience with corporate operations helped them avoid common small business mistakes and position themselves for long-term success. Marcus continued to serve as their connection to the local business community and their advocate with potential clients. His genuine enthusiasm for their services and his practical understanding of small business challenges made him incredibly effective at generating referrals and new business opportunities. Within 3 months, they had grown from 3 clients to 15. Within 6 months, they had a waiting list of businesses that wanted to work with them. Within 9 months, they were generating enough revenue to pay each team member a salary that was competitive with what they had earned in their previous positions. But the financial success, while important, wasn't the most significant aspect of their transformation. Each team member had rediscovered their professional confidence and personal sense of purpose. They were no longer people who had been discarded by the economy. They were innovators who were creating value and making a difference in their community. Sarah found herself excited about technology again in a way she hadn't experienced since her early career. She was building systems that solved real problems for real people rather than just fulfilling corporate requirements. Her technical skills were being used creatively and meaningfully. David had overcome his social anxiety by focusing on serving clients rather than selling himself. When he was helping business owners communicate more effectively, his nervousness disappeared because he was focused on their needs rather than his own fears. His creative talents were finally being recognized and valued. Lisa was teaching again, but in a context that was more fulfilling than her previous classroom experience. She was helping adults achieve their professional goals rather than just covering required curriculum. Her communication skills were making a direct impact on her client's success. Alex had gained the professional experience he needed while also developing an expertise in small business marketing that made him incredibly valuable. His theoretical knowledge had been transformed into practical skills that produced measurable results. James was building again, but instead of constructing physical structures, he was creating business systems and processes that helped his teammates and clients succeed. His craftsmanship had found a new expression in the careful attention to detail he brought to every aspect of their operations. Robert had rediscovered the satisfaction of leadership and strategic thinking that had motivated him throughout his corporate career. He was using his management experience to guide a team that valued his contributions and respected his expertise. Marcus had found a role that utilized his people skills, practical wisdom, and deep understanding of working-class business challenges. He was the bridge between his teammates' professional expertise and their clients' real-world needs. The transformation wasn't just individual, it was collective. They had become more than the sum of their parts, creating value that none of them could have generated alone. Their complementary skills, perspectives, and experiences had combined to create a business that was more innovative, more effective, and more responsive than traditional service providers. Their success began to attract attention beyond their immediate client base. Local business organizations invited them to speak at meetings and conferences. A regional newspaper wrote a feature story about their innovative approach to small business marketing. A state university asked them to guest lecture in entrepreneurship classes. But the most meaningful recognition came from their clients. Restaurant owners were recommending them to other restaurant owners. Retail businesses were referring them to other retail businesses. Service companies were introducing them to other service companies. Their reputation was growing organically because they were delivering results that exceeded their clients' expectations. The team realized they had created something that could be replicated and scaled. Other cities had the same kinds of struggling small businesses and unemployed professionals that had brought them together. Their model could be adapted to different markets and different industries. They began developing training materials and operational guidelines that would allow other groups to create similar businesses in their own communities. They weren't just building a company. They were pioneering a new approach to economic development that brought together unemployed talent and struggling businesses in mutually beneficial partnerships. 12 months after their first meeting in Patricia's support group, they were invited to present their story at a national conference on unemployment and economic development. The invitation came from a federal agency that was looking for innovative approaches to workforce development and small business support. As they prepared for this presentation, they reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed. A year earlier, each of them had been struggling individually with unemployment, underemployment, or business failure. They had felt isolated, discouraged, and increasingly hopeless about their professional futures. Now they were being asked to share their insights with policymakers, business leaders, and economic development professionals from across the country. They were no longer people seeking help. They were innovators offering solutions. The presentation they prepared for the national conference would be their most important yet. They needed to tell their story in a way that inspired other communities to try similar approaches while also providing practical guidance for implementation. They needed to demonstrate that their success wasn't just a lucky accident, but a replicable model for addressing unemployment and small business challenges simultaneously. The national conference was held in Washington, D.C., in a convention center that intimidated even Robert, who had attended many corporate events during his management career. The audience included senior officials from the Department of Labor, representatives from economic development agencies, directors of workforce development programs, and executives from major corporations who were interested in innovative approaches to unemployment challenges. As the 7 team members walked into the main auditorium, they could feel the weight of the moment. 18 months earlier, they had been sitting in a support group for unemployed professionals, struggling with individual problems that seemed insurmountable. Now, they were being asked to address some of the most influential people in economic policy and workforce development. The presentation began with Marcus telling their origin story. He spoke without notes, describing the despair and isolation each team member had experienced before they found each other. His honesty about their struggles and his plain-spoken explanation of how they had discovered their potential as a team resonated powerfully with an audience that dealt with unemployment statistics, but rarely heard personal stories from the people behind the numbers. Sarah followed with a technical explanation of their platform and services that was sophisticated enough to impress the business executives in the audience while remaining accessible to the policy makers who needed to understand practical applications. She demonstrated how technology could be used to level the playing field between small businesses and large corporations, but she also showed how unemployed technical professionals could create value by applying their skills in new contexts. David presented case studies that illustrated the visual transformation they had created for their clients. His before and after examples were so dramatic that several audience members asked to take photos of his slides. But, more importantly, he explained how creative professionals who couldn't find traditional employment could partner with small businesses that couldn't afford traditional creative services. Lisa described their communication strategies and training programs, emphasizing how educational professionals could transfer their teaching skills to business development contexts. She had prepared materials that showed how their approach could be adapted to different industries and different regional markets. Alex presented their marketing results and growth metrics with the precision and insight that impressed even the corporate executives in the audience. His data demonstrated that their innovative approach wasn't just feel-good storytelling. It was producing measurable economic impact for their clients and sustainable income for their team members. James explained their operational systems and quality control processes, showing how their business model ensured reliable service delivery and professional standards. He had prepared implementation guides that other communities could use to replicate their approach while adapting it to local conditions and needs. Robert concluded with financial projections and economic impact analysis that demonstrated how their model could be scaled to address unemployment and small business challenges in communities across the country. His presentation included cost-benefit calculations that showed how their approach could generate positive returns for individual participants, client businesses, and local economies. When they finished their presentation, the auditorium erupted in applause that lasted for several minutes. But the real validation came during the question and answer session that followed. A Department of Labor official asked how their model could be integrated into existing workforce development programs. The team had anticipated this question and had prepared specific recommendations for policy changes and funding mechanisms that would support similar initiatives in other communities. A corporate executive asked about the scalability of their approach and whether it could be applied to larger businesses and different industries. Sarah and Robert tag-teamed this question, explaining how their platform could be expanded and their methodology could be adapted without losing the personal touch that made their services effective. A workforce development director asked about the training and support that would be needed to help other groups replicate their success. Lisa and James had prepared comprehensive training materials and implementation guides that addressed exactly this concern. The most challenging question came from an economist who asked whether their success was sustainable or whether they were simply benefiting from temporary market conditions. Alex answered this question with detailed market analysis that demonstrated the long-term trends driving demand for their services, while Marcus provided practical examples of how their approach addressed fundamental challenges that weren't going away. After the formal presentation, they were surrounded by conference attendees who wanted to learn more about their methodology, discuss potential partnerships, and explore opportunities for collaboration. Business cards and contact information were exchanged faster than they could keep track of. A venture capital firm expressed interest in providing funding for expansion into other markets. A national nonprofit organization wanted to partner with them to develop training programs for unemployed professionals. A state government agency asked them to pilot their approach in 3 cities that were struggling with high unemployment and declining small business sectors. Most significantly, a coalition of community colleges wanted to incorporate their methodology into their workforce development curricula. This partnership would allow them to share their approach with thousands of unemployed professionals and struggling small businesses across multiple states. But the conversation that had the most impact on the team came from an unexpected source. A young woman approached them after the formal session had ended and introduced herself as a recent college graduate who had been unemployed for 8 months. She had been working as an intern at the conference and had listened to their presentation from the back of the room. 6 months ago, I was ready to give up, she told them. I thought there was something wrong with me because I couldn't find a job. Listening to you today made me realize that maybe I've been thinking about this all wrong. Instead of trying to fit into something that already exists, maybe I should be creating something new. She explained that she had been studying environmental science, but hadn't been able to find entry-level positions in her field. However, she had noticed that many small businesses in her community wanted to implement sustainable practices, but didn't know how to get started. She wondered if she could apply their collaborative model to create a business that helped local companies reduce their environmental impact while building her own career in environmental consulting. Marcus gave her his business card and told her to call them the following week. We'll help you figure out how to get started, he promised. That's what people did for us, and we're going to keep doing it for others. This conversation crystallized something important for all 7 team members. Their success wasn't just about building a profitable business or proving that their approach worked. It was about demonstrating that unemployed and underemployed people could create value by collaborating instead of competing, by focusing on what they could contribute instead of what they lacked, and by serving others instead of just serving themselves. Over the following months, their business continued to grow, but they also became mentors and advisors to other groups that wanted to replicate their model. They developed training programs, created resource libraries, and established partnerships with organizations that could provide support and guidance to emerging teams. Sarah began teaching web development workshops specifically designed for unemployed technical professionals who wanted to start their own businesses. Her classes focused on building platforms that serve small businesses and local communities rather than just pursuing venture capital funding or corporate employment. David created design training programs that helped unemployed creative professionals apply their skills to small business marketing challenges. His workshops emphasized collaboration and community building rather than individual competition for limited agency positions. Lisa developed communication and business development curricula that were adopted by community colleges and workforce development programs across multiple states. Her materials helped unemployed professionals learn how to identify market opportunities and build businesses that addressed real community needs. Alex became a consultant and trainer specializing in digital marketing for small businesses and startup teams. His expertise in combining theoretical knowledge with practical application made him incredibly valuable to both unemployed professionals and struggling small businesses. James created project management and operational training programs that helped other collaborative teams establish professional standards and reliable service delivery systems. His materials became standard resources for workforce development programs that emphasized entrepreneurship and self-employment. Robert established a consulting practice that helped communities develop economic development strategies based on connecting unemployed talent with small business needs. His experience with both corporate management and entrepreneurial startup challenges made him uniquely qualified to guide policymakers and program administrators. Marcus became a speaker and advocate who traveled around the country sharing their story and encouraging other communities to try similar approaches. His ability to connect with both unemployed professionals and small business owners made him an effective ambassador for their methodology. 2 years after their first meeting in Patricia's support group, their original business had grown to serve over 200 clients and had generated enough revenue to employ 15 people. But their broader impact was even more significant. Their model had been replicated in 12 cities, had influenced policy changes in 6 states, and had been featured in dozens of academic studies and government reports. The approach they had pioneered was being integrated into workforce development programs, economic development initiatives, and entrepreneurship education curricula across the country. Universities were teaching their methodology in business schools and public policy programs. Government agencies were using their model to design new approaches to unemployment challenges. Most importantly, hundreds of unemployed and underemployed people had used their approach to create businesses, find meaningful work, and rebuild their professional confidence. Thousands of small businesses had received services and support that helped them compete more effectively and serve their customers more professionally. The ripple effects of their success continued to expand in ways they had never anticipated. Their clients referred other businesses to them, but they also started their own collaborative ventures inspired by the team's example. Unemployed professionals who attended their workshops didn't just learn new skills. They formed their own teams and created their own businesses. Their story was being told in classrooms, boardrooms, and community centers around the world. Business schools used their case study to teach entrepreneurship and innovation. Policymakers referenced their model when designing workforce development programs. Community organizers adapted their approach to address local economic challenges. The most meaningful recognition came 3 years after their first client presentation, when they were invited to speak at an international conference on economic innovation in Switzerland. The invitation came from the United Nations Office for Economic Development, which was studying approaches to unemployment and small business development that could be applied in developing countries. As they prepared for this international presentation, they reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. They had started as 7 individuals who felt discarded by an economy that didn't seem to value their contributions. They had transformed themselves into innovators who were influencing economic policy and workforce development strategies around the world. But perhaps the most important transformation was personal. Each team member had rediscovered their professional identity and personal sense of purpose. They were no longer defined by what they had lost. They were defined by what they had created together. Their success hadn't come from finding ways to fit into an economic system that had rejected them. It had come from creating a new approach that valued collaboration over competition, contribution over credentials, and service over self-promotion. They had proven that when people combine their strengths instead of competing with their weaknesses, they can create value that benefits everyone involved. As they stood together on the international stage, sharing their story with representatives from dozens of countries, they knew they had become part of something much larger than their individual success. They had become proof that ordinary people could create extraordinary impact when they refused to accept limitations and committed to serving others. The 7 people who had once sat in a support group for unemployed professionals were now recognized as pioneers in economic innovation. But they never forgot where they had started or the desperation that had brought them together. They continued to mentor other groups, support other communities, and prove that the most powerful solutions often come from the people who understand problems most intimately. Their story had become a source of hope for millions of people around the world who felt left behind by economic change. It demonstrated that unemployment wasn't a personal failure, but an opportunity for innovation, that collaboration was more powerful than competition, and that the most extraordinary achievements often began with the simplest decision to refuse to give up. 5 years after that first meeting in Patricia's support group, the impact of their collaboration had spread far beyond anything they could have imagined. Their original business had evolved into a nationwide network of collaborative teams serving thousands of small businesses, but their influence extended into areas they had never anticipated. Universities across 3 continents were teaching their methodology in economics, business, and social innovation programs. The 7-team model, as it had become known in academic circles, was being studied as an example of how collaborative entrepreneurship could address both unemployment and small business challenges simultaneously. Government agencies in 15 countries had implemented policies based on their approach. The European Union had funded a multi-million euro initiative to replicate their model in regions affected by industrial decline. The World Bank was developing programs to adapt their methodology for emerging economies where traditional employment structures were inadequate for growing populations. But the most profound impact was on individual lives. The collaborative approach they had pioneered had been used by thousands of unemployed professionals to create meaningful work and sustainable businesses. Their methodology had become a standard resource in workforce development programs, community colleges, and economic development initiatives around the world. Marcus had been invited to serve as an advisor to the Department of Labor on policies affecting long-term unemployment. His experience as both a factory worker and a successful entrepreneur gave him insights into policy challenges that few advisors could provide. He split his time between speaking engagements, policy work, and mentoring new collaborative teams. Sarah had established a nonprofit organization that provided technical support and training to emerging collaborative businesses. Her platform had been adapted and improved to serve teams in dozens of industries and hundreds of communities. She had also become a leading voice in discussions about how technology could be used to democratize entrepreneurship rather than just serving established businesses. David had opened a design studio that specialized in helping other creative professionals transition from traditional employment to collaborative entrepreneurship. His work had been featured in major design publications, but he was most proud of the hundreds of artists, designers, and creative professionals who had used his training programs to build sustainable careers. Lisa had returned to formal education, but in a completely new context. She had developed curricula and training programs that were being used in community colleges and universities to teach collaborative business development. Her approach to communication and business education had influenced how entrepreneurship was taught in academic settings. Alex had become a leading consultant and researcher in the field of collaborative marketing and small business development. His insights into how unemployed professionals could serve small businesses had shaped industry practices and academic research. He had also established a consulting firm that helped communities implement collaborative economic development strategies. James had expanded his project management and operational expertise to serve large-scale collaborative initiatives. He worked with government agencies, nonprofit organizations, and private foundations to design and implement programs that connected unemployed talent with community needs. His systems were being used to manage collaborative projects across multiple industries and regions. Robert had become a thought leader in collaborative economics and economic development policy. He served on boards of national organizations, advised government agencies on workforce development strategies, and had written a book about their experience that had become required reading in many business and public policy programs. Their original business continued to thrive, but it had evolved into something much larger than a marketing services company. They had created an ecosystem of collaborative businesses, training programs, support organizations, and policy initiatives that were addressing unemployment and small business challenges on a global scale. The 7 original team members remained close colleagues and friends, but they had also become leaders of a movement that included thousands of other professionals who had used their approach to rebuild their careers and create meaningful work. The annual conference they organized brought together collaborative teams from around the world to share experiences, develop new strategies, and support emerging initiatives. The most remarkable aspect of their success was how it had maintained its focus on serving others while generating sustainable financial returns for everyone involved. Their approach had proven that businesses could be profitable while also creating social value, that collaboration could be more effective than competition, and that unemployed and underemployed people could be innovators rather than just job seekers. Their story continued to inspire new applications and adaptations. Medical professionals who had been displaced by healthcare changes were using their model to create collaborative practices that served underserved communities. Teachers who had been affected by education budget cuts were forming teams that provided innovative educational services to families and businesses. Engineers and technical professionals were creating collaborative firms that helped small manufacturers and local governments address infrastructure and technology challenges. The ripple effects extended into unexpected areas. Communities that had implemented their collaborative approach were reporting improvements in social cohesion, civic engagement, and economic resilience. The methodology that had started as a way for 7 unemployed people to create work for themselves had become a tool for community development and economic revitalization. International recognition came when they were invited to address the United Nations General Assembly on the topic of inclusive economic development. The invitation came as part of a special session on innovative approaches to unemployment and economic inequality that could be applied in both developed and developing countries. Standing before representatives from 193 countries, the 7 team members share their story not as individual success cases, but as proof of a principle that could be applied anywhere people were willing to collaborate, serve others, and refuse to accept artificial limitations on their potential. Marcus spoke about the dignity of work and the importance of creating opportunities for people to contribute their skills and experience in meaningful ways. He emphasized that their approach worked because it valued practical wisdom and life experience rather than just formal credentials or recent employment history. Sarah explained how technology could be democratized to serve collaborative businesses and community needs rather than just large corporations and venture-funded startups. She demonstrated how technical skills could be applied to create platforms and tools that empowered communities rather than just generating profits for shareholders. David showed how creative professionals could use their talents to serve community needs and small business challenges rather than competing for limited positions in agencies and corporations. His presentation included examples of collaborative design teams that were working in dozens of countries to help local businesses communicate more effectively with their customers. Lisa described how educational and communication skills could be applied to business development and economic empowerment rather than just traditional classroom teaching. She had prepared materials that showed how their communication strategies were being adapted for different cultures, languages, and economic contexts. Alex presented research demonstrating the economic impact of collaborative businesses on local communities and regional economies. His data showed that their approach generated higher returns for both individual participants and local economies than traditional workforce development programs. James explained the operational and management systems that enabled collaborative teams to maintain professional standards and reliable service delivery while remaining flexible and responsive to local needs. His presentation included implementation guides that communities around the world were using to establish their own collaborative initiatives. Robert concluded with policy recommendations and economic analysis that demonstrated how governments and organizations could support collaborative entrepreneurship as a strategy for addressing unemployment, supporting small businesses, and building economic resilience. His recommendations were being studied by policymakers in dozens of countries. The response from the international audience was unprecedented. Representatives from countries facing high unemployment, economic transition, or small business challenges requested detailed information about implementing similar programs. Development organizations asked for partnerships to adapt the methodology for their specific contexts and communities. Most significantly, a consortium of international foundations announced a $50 million initiative to support collaborative business development in 50 countries over the following 5 years. The funding would be used to establish training programs, create support networks, and develop policy frameworks that encouraged collaborative approaches to unemployment and small business development. But the recognition that meant the most to the 7 original team members came from an unexpected source. Patricia Williams, the volunteer counselor who had facilitated the support group where they had first met, was invited to join them at the United Nations presentation. Patricia had continued running her support group throughout the years, watching hundreds of other unemployed professionals find hope, direction, and eventually success. She had become an advocate for collaborative approaches to unemployment, and her community center had become a model for how support groups could evolve into incubators for collaborative businesses. 5 years ago, I watched 7 discouraged people discover that their individual problems could become collective solutions, Patricia told the international audience. Today, their approach is being used by thousands of people around the world who are proving that unemployment isn't a personal failure, but an opportunity for innovation. As the 7 team members stood together on the United Nations stage, they reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. They had started as individuals who felt discarded by an economic system that didn't value their contributions. They had become proof that collaborative innovation could address complex social and economic challenges while creating meaningful work and sustainable businesses. Their success hadn't come from finding ways to fit into existing structures that had rejected them. It had come from creating new structures that valued collaboration over competition, service over self-promotion, and contribution over credentials. They had demonstrated that when people combine their strengths instead of competing with their weaknesses, they can create value that benefits everyone involved. The methodology they had pioneered was no longer just their story. It had become a movement that was transforming how people thought about unemployment, entrepreneurship, and economic development. Their approach was being taught in schools, implemented by governments, and used by communities around the world to create opportunities and build resilience. As they prepared to return home from their United Nations presentation, they knew their work was far from finished. There were still millions of unemployed and underemployed people around the world who could benefit from collaborative approaches to creating meaningful work. There were still countless small businesses that could thrive with the kind of support that collaborative teams could provide. But they also knew they had proven something important about human potential and economic possibility. They had demonstrated that ordinary people could create extraordinary impact when they refused to accept limitations and committed to serving others. They had shown that the most powerful solutions often came from the people who understood problems most intimately. Their story had become a source of hope for millions of people around the world who felt left behind by economic change. It proved that collaboration was more powerful than competition, that service was more fulfilling than self-promotion, and that the most remarkable achievements often began with the simple decision to refuse to give up. The 7 people who had once been strangers in a support group for unemployed professionals had become living proof that when people work together to serve others, they can create value that transforms not only their own lives, but the lives of countless others around the world. Their legacy wasn't just the businesses they had built or the policies they had influenced. It was the demonstration that human potential is unlimited when people choose collaboration over competition, service over self-interest, and hope over despair. They had shown that the most speechless moments come not from individual achievement, but from the extraordinary things that happen when ordinary people decide to create something meaningful together.